Hello, everyone. Today we are diving into Korean society, a place so complex, intense, and socially high definition that it sometimes feels like every human interaction comes with subtitles, background music, and a panel of judges. At the center of it is collectivism, the idea that we often matters more than I. In Korea, a person is usually not seen as one fully separate individual standing alone like some kind of majestic lone wolf. Absolutely not. You are more like a multi-tab browser with 42 social windows open at once. Family, school friends, hometown ties, workplace circles, alumni networks, and at least 3 people your mother insists you are somehow already connected to. So the self is less like one independent dot and more like a fish caught in a giant social net, trying not to flop so hard that the entire village gets a notification. And here's the important part. When one part of that net moves, everybody feels it. One rumor, one awkward moment, one tiny social mistake, and suddenly the whole neighborhood has the update before lunch, dessert, and a follow-up analysis in the group chat. That is why relationships matter so much. Korean society often works like a living web, powered by constant interaction, mutual awareness, and emotional Wi-Fi so strong it can detect your embarrassment before you do. To understand any Korean workplace, organization, or community, you first need to understand in-make, personal connections that are powerful, sticky, and somehow more clingy than plastic wrap in a microwave. So are you ready to enter the giant world of Yuri, meaning our? Great. Let's move to the next slide and act like any of this will remain mentally affordable. Here is the menu for today. A full 4-course meal made of history, hierarchy, social pressure, and just enough identity confusion to qualify as seasoning. First, we go back in time and ask, where did Korean collectivism even come from? And why is it still gripping society like an auntie at a family reunion? Then we compare it with Western individualism, which is basically the philosophy of I do what I want, but with better boundaries, stronger eye contact, and fewer emotional obligations before breakfast. Second, we look at high-power distance and Confucianism, the legendary duo that helped create a culture where hierarchy matters a lot, and, because I said so, somehow arrives wearing academic glasses. Third, we step into the world of rice farming, where cooperation was not cute, optional, or part of a corporate retreat with matching t-shirts. It was survival. Miss one step, and suddenly the harvest is ruined and everyone is staring at you like you personally betrayed photosynthesis. Finally, we move into the modern era and meet the Korean self, active, ambitious, competitive, and still somehow auto-connecting to the group like public Wi-Fi with trust issues. By the end of this presentation, I hope you will not only understand Korean social relations better, but also feel like you have unlocked the secret developer mode of the Korean social brain. So let's stop reading the menu like nervous first dates and start with course number 1. To understand Korean collectivism, we have to go way back to old village life. Long ago, many communities were separated by mountains and rivers, so people had to rely heavily on the neighbors living right next to them. In those villages, life was close, shared, and basically impossible to keep private. Everyone knew who your family was, what land you owned, and probably what you ate for breakfast 3 Tuesdays ago, including whether you looked grateful about it. Privacy was not thriving. Privacy had packed a bag and left. And because the central government was far away, villages often had to solve problems on their own. So cooperation was not just a nice moral value you print on a poster and ignore after lunch. It was a survival tool. If you wanted to survive winter, protect your house, or settle a fight without turning the whole village into a live-action gossip festival, you needed the people around you. Naturally, the group came first. Personal wishes usually had to wait until community stability was secured. In other words, my dream often had to take a number and sit quietly while our peace got VIP access. After generations of living like this, people became used to seeing society as a web of relationships, rather than a collection of separate individuals. That old social glue is one major reason Korean collectivism still feels so strong today. So now that we have seen the village version, let's compare this group mindset with other countries and watch the contrast get almost offensively dramatic. Now let's bring in some numbers for a dramatic international showdown. According to Hofstede's cultural data, the United States scored 91 on the Individualism Index. That is basically a national-level scream of, my life, my rules, my sandwich, and please do not even look at my sandwich. Korea, by comparison, scored only 18. Yes, 18. Not 81. Not close enough. Just 18. Sitting there like a cultural plot twist. That places Korea very low on individualism and very high on collectivism. Even Japan, which many people also think of as group-oriented, scored 46, much higher than Korea. Korea's personal autonomy score is also relatively low. So compared with countries like Sweden or Germany, Korea often appears much more group-conscious, socially tied, and highly aware of hierarchy. In simple terms, many Western societies teach people to stand out, speak up, and define themselves as individuals. Korea more often teaches people to read the room, protect relationships, and understand themselves through the group. Of course, this does not mean Koreans have no personal identity. Absolutely not. It just means that identity is often expressed inside a social structure, rather than outside it kicking down the door yelling, "Observe my uniqueness." And once you combine low autonomy with strong collectivism, organizations become especially sensitive to rank, titles, and status. Which means yes, the hierarchy is warming up, stretching, and preparing for a full performance. So let's move into part 2, where rank starts doing cardio in everyday life. Part 2 starts with a key idea: power distance. This simply means how comfortable a society is with unequal power between people. In Korean organizations, hierarchy is usually more visible and more accepted than in many Western workplaces. Bosses are bosses, seniors are seniors, and everyone is expected to notice that difference immediately. Sometimes before the coffee arrives, and definitely before anyone gets brave enough to have an opinion in full volume. Korea's power distance score is relatively high, which means unequal rank is often treated as normal, not weird. In real life, that can mean decisions flow from the top down, people may hesitate to disagree openly, and authority can carry a lot of psychological weight. Even in organizations that look modern on paper, a traditional atmosphere can still appear in about 3 seconds flat. The superior starts speaking, and the room becomes 90% silence and 10% professionally controlled blinking. That is one reason autonomy can feel limited in some Korean settings. The culture does not always reward direct challenge. It often rewards sensitivity to rank, timing, and the ancient office survival art of saying many words, while technically saying nothing that can get you fired. So why did this become so normal? For that, we need to look at Confucianism, the philosophy that gave hierarchy not just structure, but moral packaging, premium branding, and very strong customer retention. Behind this vertical culture is Confucianism, one of the biggest influences on Korean social thinking. At its core, Confucianism taught that society works best when each person understands their role and performs it properly. The ideal was harmony through order. Parents guide children, rulers guide subjects, seniors guide juniors, and everyone has duties that help keep the system stable. In theory, it sounds neat and elegant, like a perfectly trained orchestra, where everybody plays the right part at the right time. No chaos, no random trumpet solo, no social disaster. In Korea, Confucian ideas became especially powerful through education and elite culture. Scholars and officials were highly respected, and leadership often came with a paternal attitude. The superior was expected to care for subordinates, and subordinates were expected to show loyalty and respect. So hierarchy was not seen as just a power structure. It was also treated as a moral relationship, which sounds beautiful, right up until real life kicks the door open wearing office shoes. Because ideals do not always stay ideal. Over time, this model could shift from mutual duty to obedience, pressure, and authority, with just a little too much seasoning, like a philosophy that got left in the marinade of control overnight. That is why the modern version can sometimes feel heavier, stricter, and more exhausting than the original philosophy probably intended. In other words, same textbook, very different workplace jump scare. These vertical tendencies became even harder and more rigid during the Japanese colonial period and later under military dictatorship. In those years, obedience was trained deeply into everyday life, through rote learning in schools, strict discipline, and a social atmosphere that basically said, do what you're told, and maybe lock your questions in a drawer and throw the drawer into the ocean. It was a suffocating structure, but it also helped produce very fast, highly coordinated growth, the famous miracle on the Han River. If you push everything through in military style, you can get scary levels of efficiency. Of course, you also get stress, pressure, emotional fatigue, and a generation of people with black belts in authority trauma. So yes, the system was effective. It was also heavy enough to emotionally bench press an entire society and ask if it wanted one more set. That is why modern Korean organizations can still carry some of that rigid energy, even when they look sleek, global, and suspiciously friendly in the brochure. But now, as we move into part 3, we shift away from this more rigid Keikonde version of collectivism and look at another style, one based more on loyalty, mutual support, and the very Korean logic of, if I suffer, we suffer together, because apparently that is bonding. Now we are in part 3, and here is the key point. Not all collectivism looks the same. Triandus divided it into 2 major types. First, there is vertical collectivism, the version we just looked at, the yes commander model, where hierarchy is strong and loyalty flows upward like an emotional elevator with no emergency button and terrible lighting. Second, there is horizontal collectivism, where people still value the group, but members feel more equal to one another. In that kind of system, the bond is less about blind obedience and more about mutual support. The logic is simple. If I want to survive, you also need to survive, because there is no universe in which I am carrying this chaos by myself. In other words, the tie with your immediate peers can matter more than some distant organizational slogan printed on a motivational poster that everybody reads and absolutely nobody trusts. This is where URE, or loyalty, becomes important. Not forced loyalty, but a more human, relational kind. It is less obey the boss or else, and more we suffered together, so now we are basically emotional war veterans with matching memories. And where did this style come from? Oddly enough, a lot of it goes back to rice farming, because nothing creates solidarity faster than shared labor, shared exhaustion, and the shared possibility of agricultural disaster. The Korean focus on relationships can also be understood as a survival strategy inherited from rice farming. Rice cultivation requires a huge amount of labor at very specific times, and those moments are not negotiable. You cannot just say, "I'm not really feeling teamwork this week," like you are canceling brunch and protecting your peace. If you miss the timing, the crop suffers. And if the crop suffers, suddenly everyone is having a terrible year together, and your reputation is out there getting harvested too. That meant people could not do the work alone. Labor exchange, or pamashi, was essential. I help with your field today, and you help with mine tomorrow. It was not just kindness. It was survival with a calendar, zero flexibility, and consequences that came with weather. And if you picked a fight with your neighbor, congratulations. You may also have picked a fight with your future food supply. So peaceful cooperation and mutual dependence became extremely important values. In that environment, relationships were not a soft cultural preference or a nice personality trait. They were an economic necessity. So when we talk about collectivism in Korea, we are not talking only about ideas. We are also talking about people who learned, very practically, that teamwork keeps the rice alive and keeps everyone from becoming a cautionary tale told over empty bowls. Because of that farming background, many Koreans came to see themselves first as social beings. Being pushed out of the community was not a small personal inconvenience. It could be a serious survival problem. So avoiding conflict and maintaining harmony became one of the smartest ways to stay safe. Naturally, people also became highly sensitive to the opinions of family, neighbors, friends, and the wider community. That is how the famous question, "What will other people say?" became such a powerful force. It is not just social anxiety showing off. It comes from a long history in which the community worked like a giant airbag. It protected you, but only if you stayed inside it and refrained from doing something spectacularly weird, reckless, or memorable in the wrong way. Research by Trompenars also suggests that Korea still maintains a very strong community-oriented culture. So underneath all the modern life, fast Wi-Fi and coffee expensive enough to require emotional preparation, this old instinct for connection and harmony is still alive and functioning. In short, the community is both your safety net and your unofficial 24-hour performance review committee, and yes, they are somehow always online. Next, let's look at the philosophical framework behind this deep sense of interconnection. Now we are in the final part. The Korean relational mindset is also connected to Buddhist Hwayum philosophy. One of its most famous images is Indra's net, a vast cosmic net stretching across the universe. At every point in the net hangs a shining pearl, and each pearl reflects all the others. In other words, nothing exists completely alone. Everything is connected, and each part affects the whole. Honestly, it is like the world's most spiritual group chat. Except, everyone is a jewel, nobody can mute notifications, and somehow the conversation is still about responsibility. That image fits Korean social thinking surprisingly well. It suggests that helping yourself and helping others are not totally separate actions. Your growth and the group's harmony are deeply linked. It is a beautiful idea, very philosophical, very cosmic, and still dramatically more elegant than the average office org chart, with 3 assistant managers, 2 invisible power lines, and 1 person who outranks everyone emotionally for no clear reason. So let's zoom in a little more on this pearl image and see what kind of social ideal it suggests. In Indra's net, each pearl is separate, but each one also reflects all the others. That means individuality and connection are not enemies. In this ideal world, no one needs to lose their identity in order to belong. Everyone remains distinct, yet the whole still stays in harmony. That is very close to the social dream we often see in Korea, to keep the unique me while still blending smoothly into the harmonious we. It is a lovely idea, elegant, balanced, and much more peaceful than real life usually allows. Because, of course, the modern world is not a calm palace full of glowing pearls where everyone speaks in philosophy quotes and resolves conflict with enlightened nodding. It is more like a competitive survival arena with deadlines, performance reviews, and at least one group chat you would leave immediately if society would let you. So the big question is, how does this beautiful philosophy actually play out in today's intense society? Because the theory is harmony, but the lived experience is often just collaborative panic with snacks. Modern Korean society is not only relationship-focused, it is also intensely achievement-oriented. In many families, children are taught to value diligence, independence, effort, and strong will. So at first glance, this can look a little like Western-style individualism, but the outcome is often different. In Korea, success is frequently not just personal fulfillment, it is also a way to enter a better network. Getting into a prestigious university or a major company is not only about status or income. It is also a strategic move into a stronger circle of school ties, regional ties, and future opportunities. In other words, achievement and relationships do not cancel each other out. They team up like an overqualified superhero duo called Prestige and Connections, and unfortunately, they never take a day off. Success becomes a tool for upgrading your position inside the social web. So the network does not disappear in modern life. It just becomes more competitive, more selective, and somehow even more exhausting. Like a role-playing game where every level up gives you 3 new obligations, one fresh insecurity, and another person you are somehow supposed to impress. Finally, let's compare this modern Korean self with neighboring countries. Comparative studies of college students in Korea, China, and Japan show something interesting. Koreans tend to score especially high on what researchers call the active self. In very simple terms, that means Koreans often want to belong to the group, but also stand out inside it. If Chinese students are often described as more autonomous, and Japanese students as more likely to fit smoothly into the group, Korean students often show a different pattern. They want connection, but they also want presence. They want to be part of the team, while still saying, in spirit if not out loud, yes, but I am doing exceptionally well here, thank you for noticing. So the Korean self is not passive or invisible inside the network. It is energetic, expressive, and highly aware of its place in the group. That, in many ways, is the modern Korean social self, deeply relational, but still eager to shine like a team player who absolutely believes in teamwork as long as the MVP trophy remains visible. And with that, we arrive at the end of our tour through Korea's network society, somewhere between network hell, network art, and a LinkedIn profile trying extremely hard not to blink. Thank you.